Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update for the 19th of April 2025. I just thought I'd join in with a chat with you guys because I was just about to release my my geopolitics video, or just about to record it, and I thought, well, this is kind of breaking news and it needs to be breaking news anyway. JR asked me whether I was going to do breaking news. I thought, yeah, I'll do one. So here I am. What am I going to talk about? Well, I'm sure most of you already know that this. I'm going to move my face to the other screen so that I can focus on the on what is pretty well, could be really important. It could be the first proper truce of the entire war, but is unlikely not to be. We'll try and get into the details that I have to hand at the moment. And welcome along board everybody who is here. So we heard earlier, kind of out of the blue, that Vladimir Putin, obviously the Russian dictator, announced that there was an Easter truce. Just it was going to happen imminently, like no forewarning to this at all. So an Easter truce, which reportedly was set to begin at 6 p.m. local time, so at 6 p.m. in Kiev time, which, given that I think that was maybe an hour and a half ago now, if we are still 2 hours behind UK time, if not, then half an hour ago. Anyway, reportedly set for 6 p.m. Kiev time on the 19th of April, and then to run out at midnight on the 21st of April. In other words, just 30 hours, 24 hours to 6 o'clock tomorrow night, and then midnight tomorrow night, essentially. 30-hour Easter truce. Of course, this is Putin dictating what is happening in the war. I'd imagine if Ukraine declared a truce, that Russia would just laugh in their faces. But since this is Russia doing it, everyone seems to take this as a more serious proposition, unfairly so, I think. So right after the announcement, air alerts were activated across Ukraine. So Ukraine was like, there were already, I think, drones in the air when he announced this. Just one of these really distasteful announcements, I think, and proclamations from the Russians here. So Putin says Russian troops must brace for Ukraine's provocations during his so-called Easter truce. So it's like, here's a truce, it's starting now, 30 hours. By the way, get ready for Ukraine to break the truce. Oh, you've broken a truce? Did you see that, America? They've broken a truce. It's like, hang on, you literally just implemented this truce straight away. It's just nuts. The Kremlin's clearly laying the groundwork to blame Kiev, says War Translated. Expect a flurry of provocation claims soon to discredit Ukraine's peace efforts amid White House rhetoric. So it's worth understanding this in the context of the wider peace negotiations landscape that is forming at the moment with the US and now with Europe involved as well. We're going to talk a lot about this. This isn't just going to be the breaking news update. This is going to be a geopolitical news as well. And we're going to talk about the wider peace negotiations. But Ukraine's first reaction to the Easter ceasefire, the Easter truce, next to reports why only 30 hours and not an unconditional ceasefire. As we proposed, say Ukraine, back on March the 11th, wrote Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Counter and Disinformation on Telegram. Meanwhile, air raid alerts have been declared in Kiev and other regions of Ukraine, and air defenses are active. So more from Kovalenko in a second. Then we heard Zelensky on Putin's Easter truce, just reported by Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky, said, I think this is Zelensky speaking here, our forces continued operations in Kursk Oblast today, holding their positions. In Belgorod Oblast, our troops advance, expanding our zone of control. As for Putin's latest attempt to toy with people's lives, said Zelensky, air raid alerts are spreading across Ukraine right now. At 5:15 p.m., so that's a quarter of an hour after the truce, 45 minutes before the truce was due to start, Russian attack drones were spotted in our skies. Ukrainian air defenses and aviation are already working to protect us. Shaheds in our skies show Putin's true stance on Easter and human lives. So pretty disdainful comment there, or a comment, really casting skepticism on this Easter truce from Zelensky himself. Max24 here saying on January the 5th, 2023, so a couple of years ago, Putin announced a 36-hour Christmas ceasefire. There was no ceasefire. The assaults continued as before. Moreover, Russia then was then regrouping near Bakhmut, and exactly by the morning of January the 6th began to assault on Soledar, which was occupied by the end of the following week. In the afternoon of January the 6th, Russia shelled Kherson, killing people. On April the 21st, 2022, Putin ordered the assault of Azovstal to be called off, but Russia continued to bomb the plant with high explosive bombs as if nothing had happened. So in other words, check out the form for what Russia has in this war. Now, Andriy Sybiha, the foreign minister for Ukraine, has announced Ukraine's position remains clear and consistent. Back in Jeddah on March 11th, we agreed unconditionally to the US proposal of a full interim ceasefire for 30 days. Russia refused, and the Russian refusal to the United States has already lasted 39 days. Instead, the Moscow regime imposed various conditions and increased terror against Ukraine, civilians and civilian infrastructure throughout the country. Putin has now made statements about his alleged readiness for a ceasefire, 30 hours instead of 30 days. Unfortunately, we have had a long history of his statements not matching his actions. We know his words cannot be trusted, and we will look at actions, not words. Russia can agree at any time to the proposal for a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which has been on the table since March. We want to see Russian forces actually cease fire in all directions. We also urge all our partners and our international community to be vigilant. Only actions and not words reveal the truth. This war began and continues only because of Russia. So fairly clear there, but sort of unsure whether they are agreeing to the truce or not. Then Null Report says this is Russia's truce. This is Kherson. Russian drones attacked a residential building. 6 apartments are on fire. Just speaking to Greg Terry, just started because I asked if he wanted to come on. And hopefully he can come and join us. So this is potentially evidence that Kherson has shown that the Russians aren't serious about a ceasefire, but then they'll say, "Oh, those drones are in the air," or whatever it was that hit the resident. They say drones here. Kherson has been absolutely hammered, particularly recently, but of course for a very long time now. But then we hear Kovalenko again. So no ceasefire. Russia continues shelling across all fronts, with the heaviest attacks on the eastern axis, says Center for Counter and Disinformation head Kovalenko. Despite Kremlin claims, nothing has changed on the ground. So this seems to imply that that Ukraine are not involved in a truce, and it's going to be pretty difficult. There's going to be just absolute fighting all across the front line. To suddenly, and I'm sure the Russians won't have been given forewarning that Putin would announce this. So they wouldn't have been ready to stop, and Ukraine won't be ready to stop. I can't see that there's realistically going to be a truce. A truce is something you'd have to announce like a week in advance, maybe. Everyone counts down to that point. You try and get all your fighting out of the way before then. But to announce it, oh, there's a truce. Now, let's start it now. I just think is incredibly unrealistic. And then we hear that, as expected, Russian Z bloggers, says War Translated, and war correspondents have already started flooding the Russian information space with accusations against Ukraine, claiming Kyiv has already started violating Putin's so-called Easter truce. Chatbot of the blog of war correspondent Andrei Filatov, a 60mm mortar is firing at our positions. Shebekina is covered with cassettes. That's kind of like cluster munitions usually. And here comes the truce. The drones are still flying as before. They don't care about the truth. In other words, they are claiming the Ukrainians are still carrying on with their military activity, which I'd imagine they still are. I think it's pretty unrealistic to expect there to be this sudden truce out the blue. Okay, so kind of that's what's going on with the truce. In other words, news is pretty much breaking all the time. I don't know if it really is something that's being adhered to by either side. I'm pretty sure Russian armies in Ukraine had no idea there would be a ceasefire, says Ilya Ponomarenko, starting within less than the next 2 hours after Putin's speech. And there were no such orders to halt all hostilities against Ukraine immediately. And the war continues just as hours before. This ceasefire was meant to exist only in front of Trump's eyes as an excuse to accuse Ukraine of failing to stop a giant war against itself. And that's certainly one way of interpreting this. What a stupid publicity stunt. It's a stunt for the Trump administration. I mean, these are what some of these analysts are saying, and I wouldn't disagree. It probably an audience of one there for this. So now let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the peace negotiations as a whole, because I think there are some pretty problematic moves going on from the. I'm sorry, this is going to be fairly critical of the American administration, but I think most of us are beyond that now. Like, we understand. So the reality of the situation is, I'm going to make my face big again. Sorry. The reality of the situation is, and if you're a big fan of Trump, you're not going to like this. But we have the fact that before the election and after the election, Trump announced very clearly that if either side was not going to play ball with regards to the peace negotiations, he would come down super heavily on either side, the one that wasn't playing ball. So the Russians weren't going to play ball, then Trump would massively increase sanctions on Russia, including in the hydrocarbons sector, and give as many weapons to Ukraine as they possibly needed. That's what he said. He said that before. He said it before the election and after the election. And he said if Ukraine weren't going to play ball and were dragging their feet or being difficult, then they would stop any assistance to Ukraine straight away. What has actually happened is he's done that to Ukraine anyway, outside of the success of the peace negotiations, while Ukraine have said, well, we're up for a full ceasefire. We are fine with an unconditional ceasefire. So Ukraine have said, we're cool. And yet they've been punished anyway. And Russia have received no punishments at all. In fact, they've received concessions, with the US supposedly lightening sanctions and not following up on sanctions implementation as heavily. And here we've got the situation where Russia are clearly not playing ball outside of this Easter truce, not playing ball for the frustration of Rubio and others and Trump himself. And yet, instead of saying, right, we're going to then hit them with sanctions and we're going to give Ukraine all the weapons they can handle, which is what he had promised before or stated before. Instead of doing that, he's saying, we're going to walk away. So he's dropped the whole idea of being hard on, well, certainly being hard on Russia. I think he's still planning on being hard on Ukraine, because his allegiances lie with Putin and with Russia. That is Trump I'm talking about. That's the kind of larger situation as it stands. Now, CNN has come out and confirmed a story previously reported by Bloomberg that the US in these peace negotiations are ready to recognize Russian control of Crimea as part of the US proposal to drive an end to the war in Ukraine. An official familiar with the framework told CNN on Friday. In other words, Russia are wanting their maximal objectives to be achieved, which is that start with, I mean, the minimal part of the maximalist objectives are, minimal part is the 5 oblasts of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea are to be given to the Russians as part aligning with their constitution, their newly amended constitution, that they will control all of those regions. One presumes that that's a full area of those regions which they don't control, apart from Crimea. None of those other 4 they fully control. So this would be giving Russia more land than they already have, and then saying, oh yeah, by the way, you can keep Crimea formally now. So that's the American stance, which is exactly what the Russians want. Absolutely outrageous. And as Viggo Holmstrom says, anyone who's familiar with the Crimea's geopolitical importance and military history would say that US administration is proposing, what they are proposing is lunacy and an invitation to take another bite of Ukraine later on. And that's the point, is that you start validating and really confirming, officially confirming Russia's ownership of these areas, then that is patting him on the back and saying that, yeah, we completely advocate any aggressive nation walking into areas of territory that aren't theirs and staking their claim to it, and eventually we'll just give it to them. That's a Pandora's box of really problematic geopolitics that is being opened there. Absolute shocker. So yeah, it is a true. Well, it's mind-boggling that the Americans would be so obviously aligning themselves with Russia these days. Then Jane Kiev says, well, and here it is, Trump's plan is exactly Putin's plan. So Kiev Post reported yesterday that the US has proposed a plan to its allies aimed at ending Russia's war against Ukraine, reportedly including, and we've heard about the areas such as Crimea, reportedly including provisions to ease sanctions on Moscow and allow Russian-occupied territories to remain under Putin's control. So Bloomberg's reported that. CNN has now confirmed that, at least to some degree. We have this situation where the US really is fully aligned with Russia. It is just utterly unacceptable. Then, of course, we've got the minerals deal that's rumbling on. The agreement on minerals with the Americans apparently now does not include mention of any debt, said the head of the Ukrainian delegation, Taras Kachka. I'm wondering whether the Ukrainians yet again have done an amazing job of paring back the worst excesses of the minerals deal like they did the first time. And then, of course, it got up to the signing of it in the White House, and Zelensky was kicked out the White House just before he got to sign it. Now, that version of the minerals deal was way better than the original version, which was very much extortion. Then it got sort of started again, and they realized that Ukraine had done a good job of changing the minerals deal in their favor. So it started again as being even harsher on Ukraine. And then we've got to this situation where Ukraine might well have changed the agreement. They've got a legal team on their side as well, American legal team, actually, the American legal company that's working on their behalf to try and negotiate this minerals deal much more in their favor. There is no logic of debt in either US proposals or the Ukrainian proposals. It is about how much both the US and Ukraine want to earn from investments in the country. Only once did the proposal appear regarding numbers. This was one of the text variants that was leaked to the media. And since then, there have been no attempts to formulate numbers because everyone understands that this is not debt, but mutually beneficial cooperation. And there could be a difference here between those negotiating the minerals deal and Donald Trump. Donald Trump sees this as debt and as a way of getting back 500 billion. Then it's turned to supposedly 300 billion, then 100 billion. Right. And that's more aligned to what has been spent on Ukraine, although we can also argue with those figures because that was not actually money, but book value of equipment, etc., by and large, or at least to some degree. So it might be some good news for Ukraine here that they have managed to negotiate the minerals deal into looking a lot better for Ukraine and not so much of a case of extortion. And as we all know, it has to go through the Verkhovna Rada, or at least the last one did. So I presume this one would as well, a point that Viggo Holmsund is also making here in the live chat. So yeah, it has to be. I mean, surely the American negotiators are going to realize they can't have a proposal that is so pro-American, so extortionate for the Ukrainians that it just wouldn't get passed unless we're back to the situation of like they want it not to succeed, so they can use that as a stick to beat Ukraine with, and even more reason to pull out peace negotiations. But if they're actually serious about a minerals deal, then it clearly can't be too egregious for the Ukrainians because they just won't sign it and it won't pass the Verkhovna Rada. Okay, we're going to move on now. So only 40% of US Republicans, I know I have a number of Republican viewers who are probably more of the old school Republican sorts, such that they look at the present MAGA Republicanism under Trump and think, yeah, that's not really me. That's not what I stand for. And they're kind of a bit left out at the moment in the cold without a political home. And we'll talk a little bit about Fitzpatrick, a Republican who's just been in Ukraine and advocating for Ukraine. But here, only 40% of US Republicans see Russia as the enemy. And that's probably those Republicans we're talking about, the kind of Reagan Republicans. A majority have a negative opinion of NATO, and an overwhelming majority say they are unconcerned about Russia invading other countries or the consequences of Russia winning in Ukraine. Now, this is a big change from the beginning of the war, right? when there's much more bipartisan support for Ukraine. There has been a change. The question is, what underwrites this change? So Chris Owicki says a new poll by Pew Research has found that the share of Americans who consider Russia an enemy has fallen to its lowest number since the full-scale invasion in 2022. And this has been driven largely by Republicans and Republican leaners changing their views on Russia. So what underwrites that change? In March 2022, the figure stood at 70%, is now down at 50%. This reflects Republicans shifting from 58% saying Russia is an enemy last year to only 40% now. So an 18% shift in Republicans. There's also been a slight shift among Democrats, with 5% fewer seeing it as an enemy. Large majorities of Republicans and Democrats still have unfavorable views towards Putin. Only 13% of Republicans say they have a favorable view of him. Well, that's pretty outstanding that over 1 in 10 Republicans like Putin. That is pretty worrying still, I have to say. While 18% say they have confidence in him doing the right thing in world affairs. 12% say they see Russia as a partner. Wow. Just wow. But of course, that is what Trump sees, right? In contrast, while 70% of Democrats have a favorable view of Zelensky, only 30% of Republicans now do. Why is that? So this is a case of people being driven by the rhetoric of the people at the top. So when you've got David Sachs, and he's saying it still today, banging on attacking Ukraine, when you've got David Sachs, Elon Musk, Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump Sr., all slamming Zelensky, publicly dissing him. Trump said the other day, I don't like him, I'm not in favor of him, etc., and then kind of blaming him for the war. Then people that really like Trump, people that really like Tucker Carlson, people that really like Donald Trump Jr. and J.D. Vance, they are going to agree with this. They are being sucked into this worldview. They are being dragged along. And it's really, really disgusting, in my opinion. So this likely reflects the impact of Trump's row with Zelensky in the Oval Office in February 2025. The poll was conducted between the 24th and 30th of March. NATO is overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, among whom 77% view it favorably, but only 45% of Republicans now do, a drop of 6% since last year. Only 44% of Americans see it as America's responsibility to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian invasion, down from 50% in November last year. So already a 6% drop since November. Republican support has dropped sharply from 36 to 23%. Wow, that's just absolutely terrible. And there's been a big drop in Republican concern about Russia's future threat. Only 29% are worried that Russia will invade other countries, while only 23% are concerned about Ukraine being defeated and taken over by Russia. Democrats are, by contrast, are increasingly alarmed. And here you can see, the Democrats sort of going upwards and then a sharp decline in kind of support for Ukraine. And that's really shifting the total there. It's become really, really hyper-partisan, this. The most likely explanation for the Republican shifts, says Chris Owicki, in opinion, is that they reflect Trump's increasing hostility towards Ukraine. So Trump is driving this. His team, his administration is driving with their rhetoric and actions how Republicans are thinking about Ukraine and Russia. And Zelensky, it says, Ukraine and Zelensky. His overt sympathy for Putin and the largely pro-Russian narratives being promoted by MAGA media. I think this is just really terrible to see that. Now, Zelensky met with pro-Ukraine Republican, and this is so important. This is why Mark Burns, the pastor for Trump, going out to Ukraine, changes his mind, coming back and still saying that Russia are the evil ones. And he's changed his mind and he now understands it properly. You've got Brian Fitzpatrick, a US congressman, coming to Ukraine on April the 17th, yesterday, to discuss peace and security guarantees for Ukraine. He also noted that Congressman, this is Zelensky, Fitzpatrick plans to visit Ukrainian troops near the front lines, and he did so. In fact, there's video and imagery of him doing so. He says, this is Brian Fitzpatrick's own Twitter site saying, it was my profound honor to deliver a very personal message to Vladimir Putin today from the front lines of the war near the Russian border on behalf of the PA1 community. So that's the 1st district of Pennsylvania. That's where he is, I presume, a representative for. The only permissible details to share are that the message was delivered on target. So he signed a shell and then that got sent into the Russians somewhere along the border. So he's obviously very pro-Ukrainian. He's been pro-Ukrainian before, and yeah. I do agree with this, Michael Vucci. Mark Burns has no influence on Trump. Trump is not going to pay attention particularly to any religious people at all. He's almost as godless as you. Yeah, Trump is, and I've talked about that before. Trump's God is himself, and he only uses Christianity as a way to get power. The evangelical vote is a means to an end. It is he doesn't care for religiosity or religious people's concerns. He'll flip flop on any ideology, really, in my opinion, in order to achieve his own more personal narcissistic aims. But anyway, really good to see Republicans over there, and there needs to be more of that, because they need to be fighting you change Republicans' minds not by being a Democrat or being someone outside of the US. Someone like me, I'm not going to change a Republican's mind. Someone that the Republicans that watch my channel are ones that don't need their minds changing, right? So how do you change a MAGA Republican's mind? Well, I will much more likely enforce what's called the backfire effect, where they entrench in their own original beliefs when confronted with contradictory evidence. So this kind of approach often gets people, even though I can produce the best, most rational evidence against the position, it's not going to shift this person into aligning himself or herself with me. More likely they will entrench because of who I am. So what you need is someone that's in the in-group shifting their position like this. So you need an in-group person, i.e. a Republican. That's why I talk about Pastor Mark Burns. Not so much for Trump, as Michael Vucci is correct. He's not going to convince Trump. It's not about Trump for me. It's about those others. It's about MAGA Republican people who are going to the pastor's church services, who are in the constituency of Brian Fitzpatrick, and having them shifted in their alignment, not like this, but from within like that. And then you get that change of approach. So President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer had a call to discuss a peaceful settlement to the conflict in Ukraine, just like Russia and other pro-Russian countries call it, avoiding the term full-scale invasion. This watered-down language says it all, and that's a readout from the White House. It's so clear where the White House sits. Now, I want to play you this, but I can't give you the sound of it on this browser, so I'm going to go elsewhere and put it. There's a few minutes of this that is just so valuable for you guys to see. Now, this is Ben Wallace, who is the former Secretary of Defense for the UK. He was let's try and find it. Share screen. Yeah, here we go. So he was the Conservative Secretary of Defense for Ukraine. Secretary of Defense for UK. And this coming from him is therefore kind of doubly impactful. Now, he's not serving anymore, so there's a freedom, there's a liberty for him to say what he likes, because he's not in government anymore. The reason why he stepped down as Secretary of Defense, there are a number of reasons. I know some trolls you have argued with me, it's because of this and that and whatever. No, it's because his district was he was losing his entire constituency, because there was boundaries being changed and redistricting was taking place, and he would have to then go to another place and run there. So he just I've had enough, I'm off ski. And you could also read the tea leaves that the Conservatives were going to get tonked in the election. So he quit, and then we had Grant Shapps for a short while, who actually did a pretty good job. And then we had a change of government. And we got John Healey now, who is also doing a really good job. So you've actually had Ben Wallace doing a good job, Grant Shapps doing a good job, and John Healey doing a good job. Both opposite parties, we've got bipartisan support for Ukraine. But now Ben Wallace is being very, very honest about who Donald Trump is. And this is coming from a conservative who would otherwise be aligned with the Republicans, right? Saying this. And we're going to listen to a good few minutes of Ben Wallace here.
Is it Trump the quitter on this one?
Well, I suspect they're laying the groundwork for exactly that. I warned a few months ago, that, if you want to be the great deal maker and you want to be the sort of great host of the negotiations, you do actually have to have some of your own skin in the game. You have to be able to offer something. Otherwise, you're sort of shouting at people, but not actually, leading. And leadership is generous. Now, I think, we saw that rather pathetic effort where the Russians and the Americans sat down without Europeans and Ukraine in Saudi. And what a surprise. The Ukrainians and the Europeans thought, well, that's a very interesting meeting, but nothing to do with us. And only recently, for the first time, we really saw the Americans sit down with the Europeans, including Britain, in the Elysee, I think, palace it was this week. And the Americans start to realize that they have to bring all the parties together. What we're not sure of is whether the Americans have offered Ukraine anything at all. What we know is that Witkoff, the sort of hapless US envoy on it, has put forward, what I know is that 5 or 4 oblasts of Ukraine should be given to Russia, plus Crimea, which is pretty much what Putin has wanted all along.
And again, calling Witkoff hapless, again, he's unconstrained now. Ben Wallace, he can say what he likes, and Witkoff is hapless.
I haven't heard anything on the other side what the Americans are going to offer Ukraine. If you remember, at the beginning of all of this process, Trump was pretty clear he was going to take everything off the table. He wasn't going to give Ukraine ongoing defense. He was going to charge them lots of money for any support. Actually, he was going to ask for a back payment for the equipment already gifted. He was going to not carry on. So it's quite hard if you're Ukrainian to ask yourself, A, why do I trust any peace deal with President Putin, a man who's broken every deal? I think someone studied recently, said he's broken over 100 agreements. Certainly the big ones that you and I will notice were Georgia, 2014 invasion of Ukraine, the Budapest Memorandum, the Minsk agreements. He doesn't...
He's referring to Michael Clark, who said the other day there's 190 agreements, Professor Michael Clark on Sky News. 190 agreements that Putin has signed up to that he's broken. So there's form for not trusting Putin. So he's saying, look, we shouldn't trust Putin. But Ukrainians are in a tough bind because actually kind of trusting the Americans appear to have switched sides.
Stick to anything. So he'll probably come back in a few years' time. And if you're Ukrainian, you've suffered 18,000 deaths since the 2014 invasion before the invasion of 2021. So you're not going to trust him.
2022.
So I think what you're seeing is potentially exactly as you just said in your opening analysis. Trump, the deal maker, really is more interested in the fanfare of the deal, not the outcome of the deal. I was also the defense secretary when Kabul happened, and he's busy trying to blame Biden. He set the deal. He did the deal with the Taliban that was so appalling. The Taliban basically got an open door to victory.
This is absolutely spot on. So again, like there's been this long-running thing where the Republicans are blame Biden for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And here we've got a conservative politician saying, actually, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was disastrous precisely because the deal was so poor. And this is what happens with... So he goes on to say, and we'll listen in a second, that Trump is not a very good negotiator. And we've heard this previously from people who've written books on him, talking about how he's just a rubbish negotiator. People think he's a great businessman, but actually he's had 6 bankruptcies. He's not a very good businessman. He's not a very good negotiator. He's not a very good foreign policy diplomat. And he rushes things. He doesn't know enough about stuff. He then gets bored of things really quickly and does half-assed jobs about them. And the Doha agreement with Afghanistan was basically going over the head of the Kabul administration and going straight to the Taliban, just as he's going over the head of Ukraine, straight to Russia and dealing with the bad guys and offering them all of this stuff that ends up being entirely disastrous for the administration they're supposed to be negotiating on behalf of, i.e. in that case Afghanistan, but in this case Ukraine. And it's just, history is repeating itself. And here we've got a conservative politician saying, actually, we need to be blaming Afghanistan's disaster on Trump.
And then he, as you say, Kim Jong-un, remember, he stepped across the line into North Korea, and it was all going to be some, Mr. Rocket Man, and all he did was increase his nuclear weapons. So I think what we're probably seeing is the 24 hours, it's the, I'll fix it, isn't going to happen. So he is now trying to find either an exit ramp for himself to say he's going to, I don't know what he's going to do, go off to the other side of the Pacific, or he's he's going to be able to claim a great victory. I think the victory is getting further apart rather than closer.
This is all pretty depressing, especially for Ukraine, but also for Europe and for us, because we were there from the very start, rhetorically, in terms of supplying arms. I know this from Zelensky himself. He told me lots of other people have given money and weapons, but Britain was there from the very beginning. And to consider all the investment that we made, but especially that Ukraine made in terms of blood and treasure, general sacrifice, to have the American president kind of, willy-nilly perhaps walk away, perhaps not, it's just utterly miserable, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really depressing that this administration seems to take the side of Russia. I mean,
and there you go. You've got the conservative politician again saying that the American administration have taken the side of Russia. Like, I keep saying it, we all keep saying it, but I presume most of you are now in agreement that that is truly what is happening.
Only a few days ago, Russia murdered lots of people in Sumy by hitting, I think, people at prayer. I think it was in a service, and the response from Donald Trump was, "I understand from the Russians, it's a mistake." It's like it isn't a mistake. They have daily bombing and killing people. I think that's the most depressing thing for all of us, is that the decency that used to emanate from Republican and Democrat White Houses seems to have gone at the moment. And we have the tangerine tariff man allowing President Xi to go around. This week, President Xi of China has been proclaiming himself the defender of free trade. I'm not sure what world we're now living in.
I think with that phrase, tangerine tariff man, which I meant.
And the fact that you have this former Secretary of Defense being so dismissive of Trump, calling him a tangerine tariff man, just goes to show how much disdain Trump has earned himself from international politicians around the world. Be under no illusion that people are looking on America with, as I say, disdain now. The international standing of the United States has really dropped off a cliff.
May have to steal, by the way. You got yourself disinvited from any state banquet coming up in September. Right. I'm sorry to break it to you. But can we just be clear about this? Are you now saying that Donald Trump has switched sides? He is on the side of the Russians, as many people are saying.
I think Donald Trump is always on the side of himself, right? And he seems to have some form of fetish towards President Putin. I find it very odd. Putin is nowhere near his equal. He's nowhere near the equal of the United States. Putin's economy is about half of Britain. Yet he likes to sort of, benchmark themselves against each other. I certainly have seen lots of talking points from the Kremlin being used by Putin, by Mr. Trump. For example, Ukraine invaded Russia. Those early points that
but this is alarming stuff, isn't it? I mean, he's completely rewriting history in an absurd way, in an insulting way, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be honest, if you look at all the people around him, he's allowed them to rewrite history. Vance, Rubio, they all were deeply critical of Trump. Indeed, I think, if my memory serves me right, J.D. Vance compared Trump to Hitler at one stage. And the next thing they're all allowed on his inner circle. So look, I think the reality is, as you rightly point out, Trump is a here today, gone tomorrow deal maker. The outcome of the deals, just look at his business history, turn out not to be brilliant, but he's more interested in the fanfare of the deal than the actually long-term outcome. And I think he just wants to show the people of the Midwest of America that he's got something for them.
Yeah.
And so maybe the mineral deal is all he cares about.
But that mineral deal...
And we'll leave it there because long enough on that. But, he's not a great deal maker. He's a here today, gone tomorrow deal maker that cares about the fanfare of the deal rather than the deal itself. And I think that's incredibly accurate as an understanding of how Trump operates. It really spot on there from Ben Wallace. So yeah, nothing that I would disagree with there at all. Right, let's go back to where we were. So that was the Ben Wallace snippet I wanted to play, because I think it then it lays up this idea that and I can't play this for you, but one of the comment quotes excerpted from Trump in the White House again: if one side complicates things, we'll say you're fools, you're terrible people, and we'll just walk away. So this kind of the end result is Trump is big on rhetoric and he's quite bombastic and he threatens Russia. up front, and then when it comes to it, he just capitulates completely to other strongmen. That Trump is not a strong leader. He's weak. And Adam Kinzinger I think it was Adam Kinzinger was talking about this, or it might be someone else. So saying the Democrats need to be campaigning on how weak Trump is. Just, you're really weak on this, you're really weak on that, and go for the jugular in terms of him being a really weak leader, because he doesn't ever show any strength to people who he shows strength to people who are far weaker, you know, whether it be immigrant populations or this part of the demographic or that part of the demographic. You know, he wields his power inordinately against those who are fractionally smaller, but when it comes to Russia, he steps back in light of Putin's perceived strength. What else did he say here? If for some reason one of the parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools. Yeah, that's just what we heard. You horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. I mean, it's such childish language. You're foolish, you fools, you horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that. Well, no, what you should be doing is standing up to Russia and threatening them, and then following through on the threats, rather than go, here's a threat. Oh, you didn't do anything. Oh, we're just going to walk away then. I mean, that's a first rule of teaching and parenting, is don't offer hollow threats, and then when it comes to it, not deliver them, because you're then powerless. You're then taken advantage of by your children, by your pupils. You know. Anyway, Keith Kellogg here on Fox News has then stated, directly against what Mark Rutte has just said as Secretary General of NATO, Keith Kellogg, the envoy who's now pretty much powerless because he's been sidelined, because he's basically too sensible. Quote, we have stated very clearly, Ukraine will not become part of NATO. This idea is not new. We have been saying this since 2008, when US Ambassador to Russia told US Secretary of State that was an unattainable goal. So Mark Rutte said it's an irreversible path that Ukraine is on. And then we have Keith Kellogg saying it ain't going to happen. Complete chaos. David Sachs, one of these tech bros, and if you want to go and check my video on techno-fascism, as one of the most important videos I think I've done ever. I did that earlier today. I just think we are at the precipice of techno-authoritarianism, and the people at the heart of the American government, whether it be, you know, David Sachs here, but Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they are, and Palantir, they are seeking information, data, and they are scraping the US government, the IRS, all of the departments, Department of Defense, and they're taking that data, feeding into their artificial intelligence, and we are staring down a barrel of techno-fascists being driven by their desire for greater power and all of our data without our consent. So anyway, David Sachs is one of these kind of tech bros. He's also vehemently anti-Ukrainian. So he's a South African tech bro that is at the heart of the Trump administration, adjacent, but at the heart. So the people that I talk about being at the heart of the administration who are actually adjacent are Elon Musk, because he's actually not an elected serving member of the government. David Sachs, Peter Thiel, those people, Tucker Carlson, those are the people Steve Bannon, that are driving thoughts inside the Trump administration without actually being in the Trump administration. David Sachs is one of them, saying that let Europe take it from here. It's not our war. Tatragami, I love this from Tatragami, back to him. Didn't you guys say that Ukraine was just your puppet state? So why not just order them to surrender and end the war? I love this. This is a really good point. So I'll go on with Tatragami because there's several good points here. The first one is that the people that were slagging off Ukraine prior to the war said that Ukraine was merely a puppet state of the United States. Well, if it was just a puppet state of the United States, why is everything so difficult? Oh, it's because it isn't a puppet state and it has its own sovereignty and it has its own power and it does have cards to play. So that's interesting. Then it said, what happened to your leverage over Putin or the will to use it? So again, that's sanctions, arms to Ukraine. What about that? You can use that leverage. Oh, but no. Oh, he doesn't care about you. What's happened to ending the war in 24 hours? And of course, empty promises, empty rhetoric. Yeah. And then Giorgia Meloni, thought to be a bit of a sort of a whisper in the ear of Trump because her government is fairly right-wing populist, very right-wing populist, and therefore aligned to the MAGA Republicans to some large degree from Italy. And she was over in the White House to talk to him about Ukraine and about trade wars. But when it went to Trump talking, lots of cameras were still focusing on her, seeing her sort of roll her eyes, some people claiming, and just looking just completely uninterested. Looking at Meloni is like looking in the mirror. She just DGAF, and her facial expressions and eye rolling are chef's kiss. And people have then produced memes of Giorgia Meloni, tough day at the office, having to sit next to Trump in his gaudy dictator's palace these days, talking absolute nonsense about pretty much anything. It's interesting talking about that room where Zelensky was entertained by Trump and Vance. The liberal former Turkish politician Bezin Tubuk on Trump's Oval Office treatment of Zelensky, and I love this, it's so honest. So he was interviewed and he said, what they did to Zelensky was historic filth. That son of a bitch, Trump, blamed Ukraine the moment he took office. If I was Zelensky, I'd have said, fuck you and your whole bloodline, and walked out. I couldn't have put it better than that Turkish politician who really understands the predicament that Zelensky was put in, and the positioning of the United States under Trump. Slowly, Putin is aiming to bring another enemy of America into this invasion, the Taliban. So Russia has officially removed the Taliban from its list of designated terrorist organizations and will allow it to operate within Russia. This comes as Russia seeks new partners against Ukraine and the EU. So I'm going to join some dots here. So Russia is now accepting the Taliban into its sphere of influence and dealing with it as a like-for-like kind of government, an official government, rather than a terrorist organization that's had a coup and taken control of Afghanistan. Then what do we hear from America? Trump quietly ups US engagement with the Taliban. The new approach, including the first known visit by US officials to Kabul since 2021, comes down to transactionalism, says this newspaper. Breaking the Western world. This is insane, but 100% real, says Mario here. Russia just officially removed the Taliban from its list of designated terrorist organizations and now allowing it to operate inside Russia. That means diplomatic ties, possible deals, even strategic cooperation. At the same time, Trump is quietly increasing US engagement with the Taliban too, transactional, shady, and under the radar. Now, you could argue that's a good move. It's a way of getting the Taliban to become more, I don't know, pro-Western, that kind of approach to Putin, but it didn't work with Putin. It's far less likely to work with the Taliban. You are potentially just rubber stamping the Taliban regime by giving them legitimacy in that way. But it seems like, oh, Putin's doing it, we'll do it too, because hey, we want to be just like the Putin regime. Now, luckily, in the EU, there does seem to be a bit of backbone to the new. I mean, I don't particularly agree with a lot of Friedrich Merz's policies. I'm not a massive fan of the CDU, but Friedrich Merz, the incoming chancellor, is saying Germany will take responsibility again in Europe and in the world, not loudly, but reliably, not arrogantly, but in partnership. And that's very much a rebuttal of the Trumpian approach to international politics, which is being loud and being arrogant. But he's like, no, we're going to do it in partnership with other people and reliably. But Germany is going to step up. Interesting. Now, in terms of just moving on to, again, other general geopolitical stuff here, we have Moldova. So Russia wants to replace Moldova's leadership with pro-Kremlin puppets and use the country against Ukraine, warns the president Maya Sandu. She's emphasized that Ukraine remains Moldova's shield, and the capital Chisinau has a moral duty to stay out of Putin's war. They are worried particularly about the upcoming parliamentary elections in Moldova. We've had the presidential elections, and then there was the survey, no, it wasn't referendum, on kind of Europe as part of that as well, and that all went well, but then well enough, although it's really problematic because there's a huge amount of Russian influence. They're really worried about the parliamentary elections upcoming. I can't remember when they are, maybe September. The EU is resisting Russia's attempts to lift US aviation sanctions. So again, going back to the US potentially lifting sanctions on Russia, joining the other side. But the EU is resisting Russia's attempts to lift those US aviation sanctions, maintaining a ban on Russian airlines flying over its airspace and raising safety concerns over the use of counterfeit parts on Russian aircraft, according to Politico. Just a few more points here. Kiev's accession bid, says Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, is moving faster than any in history. And I would generally agree. I mean, some nations like Serbia, I mean, they're up against it now that Vucic is going to the May the 9th Victory Day parade in Moscow, and that has possibly put Serbia's accession to the EU in jeopardy. But Turkey, other nations have spent an awful long time trying to get into the EU, and then you wonder whether they really are trying hard enough. But nonetheless, Ukraine seem to be running at a pace to get into the EU, jumping all the hurdles, and they're doing all of that while they are at war. Quite incredible. So they could well be within reach of joining by 2030. Serbia, speaking of which, has formed a new government and has expelled top pro-Russian figure amid EU pressure. So while President Alexander Vucic had previously promised sweeping personnel changes, most ministers, however, retained their posts. So there's huge protests in Serbia, as we saw both in Slovakia to a lesser degree and Hungary to a really big degree. I think Vucic should have read the tea leaves a little bit, and he shuffled the government, got rid of, I guess, a bit of a token, getting rid of a very pro-Russian figure, but essentially most people have remained the same, but it could be seen as a move in the right direction. And then finally, Zelensky himself, Ukraine themselves have imposed sanctions on Chinese firms over alleged arms supplies to Russia. And these firms provide a range of dual-use goods: Beijing Aviation, Aerospace, Jinhui Tech, Ruijin Machinery, and Zhongfu Shenying Carbon Fiber. So the Ukrainians themselves taking a stronger approach to Russia's help of Ukraine. Just seeing if there's anything else that's worth sharing with you. US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg on Fox News said the Paris meeting discussed a possible ceasefire in Ukraine soon. That's why we're heading to London next week to lock it in. I think tremendous opportunities lie ahead. And of course, that's because probably, I imagine, because Europe are involved. As soon as you start involving Europe, things can be a lot more achievable, I think. The problem of trying to do a peace deal without Ukraine or Europe, about Ukraine and Europe, I mean, yeah, you can go and meet Russia as much as you like, but you ain't going to solve the war in Ukraine. So what else? Yeah, nothing too much. There's a big prisoner swap today. But I don't know. Yeah, nothing else that I haven't already talked about. Okay, so I'm going to bring my own stupid face back into focus. Bad luck, people. And then, yeah, as people said, lots of prisoners of war exchanged today. 277 Ukrainians finally at home. Sean Pinner's cellmate was included. Oh wow, is that the guy? Was that Dima? Oh, that's amazing. Because I wonder if that's a guy that I'm thinking of, that he was wondering whether he would ever get out. Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, it would be a fantastic interview with Sean as well. Wow. Brilliant. Okay, let's have a look at some of your super chats and say a very big thank you to all of you magnificent people. Richard Bennett, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, matey. Total legend. As is Michael Vuchar. I'm wearing one of Michael's tops he sent me. This is a Canadian Rugby Sevens top of old. So thank you for sending me this, some retro Canadian apparel that he sends me. And I try and keep my solidarity with Canada going, especially during these trade war times. Thanks, Michael Vuchar, for the ATP Geopolitics memberships. Johnny Nedregard, thank you very much for being part of the team and for always chipping in. Really appreciate that, my good man. Now, Mechtild Votova, conservative Republicans are afraid of MAGA retaliation. Anything against Trump or Putin will be stopped. So this is the problem. And in fact, that reminds me, let's go back to, so if you look at my Here we go. If you look at my tabs here, I've got, you know, all that on geopolitics. I've got an American video to do, American politics video to do. The economy, just a few there on the economy. Appointments that have been made that are nuts. So I've got to talk about that. Some crazy stuff going on there. And Pete Hegseth and the DOD being in disarray. And then all of these, look at all of those tabs on American politics. But what you are talking about there, conservative Republicans are afraid of MAGA retaliation. This pertains very much to Lisa Murkowski, who is an American senator for Alaska, who has been talking about how afraid she is and how afraid many in the Republican Party are. I've just got to find where that is. Here it is, I think. Yeah, quote, "We're all afraid," Murkowski said, taking a long pause. "It's quite a statement, but we are in a time and a place where I certainly have not been here before. And I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice because retaliation is real and that's not right." So she said that in a room full of Alaska nonprofit leaders, talking about tariffs and all sorts. So that is exactly to what Mechthild Votova was talking about, that you don't get the Republicans in power, as in, you know, Congress people, standing up for what is good and right because they are so afraid of retaliation from their base or from base around the country, from Twitter, from all the actually largely bots. It's a really fascinating, I'll try and find it for you. As a Rest is Politics UK, I'll do that right now as we're talking. Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart had a look at it was them and Anthony Scaramucci, both those two, and Anthony Scaramucci put a statement on Twitter, and then they saw the reactions to it, and they got a company that can or an outfit that can tell bots and trolls from real people, and they did an analysis of the reactions to the tweets that each of them made, and it was absolutely incredible. And they found that there was some, I forget the percentages, at least 15 to 20% was it trolls and bots? I don't know, just a huge number of people reacting to that. This is it. It's Musk's bot army, it's called. This is the video here, just in case you're wondering. It's How We Trolled the Trolls, featuring Anthony Scaramucci. The Rest is Politics. And they looked at just the sheer number of people reacting to their statements on Twitter that were not actually people. They were either, well, bots, or they were not the people they purported to be, but were, you know, trolls from China and Russia, etc., etc. And so, yeah, it's not just that these politicians are afraid of retaliation from their own kind of very loud base, but also from people that pretend to be their base, but are actually bots and trolls. And they're just afraid. And they're afraid, of course, of retaliation from the administration themselves and being primaried, having the campaign being funded for their primary opposition when they next run for the position they hold. So that Musk and others will fund the campaign of someone to run against them within the Republican Party. So they are afraid. And that's no good place to have a democracy in, when people in government are afraid of speaking up and defending their own consciences. It is terrible, and that's why I've got so much to talk to you about concerning American politics. So many different things going on that are absolutely terrifying. Some of the things that are taking place, and yeah. Anyway, Stefan K from Germany here saying, "It's Europe's own fault. We've had 3 years to ramp up, didn't happen, and we're still dependent on the US. Surprise, surprise." I wouldn't be nearly so harsh, actually. And in fact, Finnish guy says in reply, "Don't generalize about all of Europe. In some countries, things have been fine with defense for a long time." But also, I would say, actually, there's been a massive ramping up in Europe from many countries, the Nordic states, Poland, Germany, even the UK. Yeah, it is to a degree like turning a tanker. But do you know what? Rheinmetall, Nammo, a lot of these companies have massively ramped up ammunition production, and yeah, you might not think it's as quick as it could be or it should be, but Europe's in a very different place now than it was 3 years ago, and so I wouldn't be so dismissive of where Europe is right now, and the problems might lie more in some of those Western European countries like Spain and Portugal and maybe Italy to a degree that aren't really coming up with the goods as much. Some of the rhetoric's there, but there's some disagreement on how to do things. That's a problem with having a group of 27 odd countries trying to come to a single agreement. But I do think Europe has done done a job in getting to a much more secure place in terms of their own industrial base and production of weaponry, and have been helping Ukraine more and more as time goes on. And now, the US has stepped back. There's a report out today from someone at Kiel Institute saying that in order to replace the Americans, the Europeans would only have to chip in 0.2% of their GDP each, which is actually quite a lot, but it's not like the end of the world. So, Europe can replace the US to some degree. Now, it might then come down to technical capabilities and whatnot, and intelligence sharing is a big worry that I have, that if the US go, Ukraine might lose that. But also, if the US goes big time, and by that I mean just properly joins Russia, then it might start giving intelligence to Russia. Now, I think that might be too distasteful for many in the in the Congress, and I'd hope that would be the case. But it may be that will have to be tested. So yeah. Johnny Christensen, thank you very much for your super sticker. Good to have you on board as well. Thanks, matey, from Denmark. And Remy Stevens, good to have you back. Gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, Remy. Really appreciate that. So that's where we are at. I don't have too much else to say. I have loads to say, but I have to go and help my partner cook up a storm in the kitchen in a second. Help or hinder, I'm not quite sure. This is something worthy of note. So the Australian election. Mitch Ashdown says voting starts in the Aussie election on Tuesday here in London at the High Commission. We'll be heading down for that. And so you've got Anthony Albanese, who is Labour, who was thought to have been ripe for the picking, a bit like Justin Trudeau in Canada, by the Liberal Party in America, which is the Conservative Party, essentially. So the Liberal Party in Australia there's this guy called Dutton. I forget his first name. But anyway, Dutton's running against Albanese. And just like Mark Carney getting this, like the Liberal Party getting this real boost. And now I think they've 83% favourites to win the election, or something like that, in Canada, which is absolutely incredible. It looks like Anthony Albanese has resurrected himself. I think Dutton hasn't done himself any favours and has been too associated. This is where we can make these connections. Dutton has been too connected to the Trump movement, the kind of Trump MAGA movement, and as Trump has become less and less popular around the world, people associated with the kind of MAGA movement, there was this kind of Make Australia Great Again under Dutton, and that's now fallen foul of the public. And so there's now potentially we could have Albanese winning another term there, as these things of these sands have really shifted. But there you go. All right, someone says potato Dutton. Obviously not a fan of Dutton. But yeah, so I don't know if that's an accurate understanding of what's going on in Australia. I only keep half an eye on these things. I only have a brain that is yay big, and I struggle to keep things in. And a bit like Homer Simpson, once something goes in, unfortunately other things fall out. And it's usually, I've written like 15 books on philosophy and whether or not God exists and all these kind of ideas, and I do feel that I've forgotten all of my previous knowledge, and now it's entirely just about war in Ukraine. That's all that's up here these days. Anyway, right. Let's Mr. Squiggle says liberals are shooting themselves in the foot. Peter Dutton, his seat is usually on a knife edge. He might lose it. Dutton attacked work from home. That was it. So it was thought to be, so a bit like Elon Musk, he's attacked working from home in Australia, and it was thought that that would be a bit of a vote winner, and it's ended up being really unpopular, and people were not up for working from home being attacked, and that did him in a little bit. Dutton also proposed deporting dual citizen criminals. Wow, so that's pretty controversial since they also have citizenship of Australia. Interesting. So yeah, he doesn't seem to be particularly popular at the moment. So it'd be interesting if Albanese gets back in. What that means for Ukraine, I think it's probably better for Ukraine if Albanese stays in. I know Australia have been criticised for not quite doing enough here and there, but I would think that you're more likely to get support from Albanese than from Dutton. Anyway, that's just my tuppence, and it could be my biases coming through as well. Okay. Thank you very much to everyone. I am going to read my books, mate. There's quite a few of them. But yeah, I don't want to ostracize too many of my audience there. The answer, though, is almost certainly no. But whether you are going to agree with that or not is another thing. Yes, so thank you very much. I really appreciate your support. Thank you very much for those who have supported the channel with the super chats and whatnot. The only thing that remains to be said is please click on the link atpgeo.com/donate that you will find in the description below, because we have our call for Ukraine, Easter Paisanki. If I can move that over to here, campaign going on, and we are moving up the ranks bit by bit. Well, at least we're getting closer to Silicon Curtain, which is really what we want. Up to 5,761 euros, so that's really great. It would be great to get into the top 5. That's what I really want. We started late at ATP Geopolitics, so we are a little bit behind the curve there, but if you guys can help out with that campaign, that would be absolutely magnificent. It is linked below. Thank you all very much. Do please hit the like before you go, and do all those kind of sharey things and the wonderful stuff that I'm sure many of you do. But the long and the short of it is that there is a truce that has been announced, and I don't think we're going to get much of a truce taking place on the front lines. That's my guess. Going to be interesting to see whether there will be any drones and missiles sent tonight from either side. It's not much else to add. There's not much else has been said in the last hour or so on the subject, but we'll keep an eye on that. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.